The beginning of this film depicts a body that has just survived a traffic accident gradually regaining its survival abilities. The body slowly rises from the ground and begins to crawl through the city. The people it encounters are all fresh blood, running around the city at lightning speed, even passing through walls without any issues. It seems that something unusual is happening. The night falls, and this is the time when this bizarre entity becomes active. As it looks up, it sees a thick black smoke rising. Perceiving something strange, it immediately stands up and approaches the source of the smoke. The destination is the home of this young boy. The ancestors of Nyat Vin all worked as teachers. His grandfather even taught calligraphy classes. Nyat Vin had been learning calligraphy from a young age and was naturally very knowledgeable about it. His brushstrokes were as beautiful as those in paintings. However, there was a strange story in Nyat Vin's house. When Nyat Vin was young, he once saw a female ghost in his grandfather's room. This woman always asked his grandfather for help, but Nyat Vin's grandfather remained silent. Nyat Vin didn't know what was happening, but he remembered being very scared at that time. The female ghost frequently appeared in Nyat Vin's house, continuing to ask, "Will you help me?" However, Nyat Vin's grandfather still wouldn't assist. He would write on a piece of paper as he always did, saying, "Take care of yourself first." The female ghost then coldly remarked, "It seems that even in death you still refuse to speak." His grandfather remained resolute in his words. One day, Nyat Vin and his father were on a bus ride with his grandfather. Suddenly, something went terribly wrong during the bus journey. There was a massive explosion that shook the sky and the earth, causing the bus to explode. Nyat Vin was severely injured but tried to open his eyes. He saw the female ghost standing in front of his grandfather in the distance. However, in a flash, she appeared right beside him. After the accident that day, Nyat Vin was fortunate to survive, but he remained in a coma for over 2 years before finally waking up. Nyat Vin and his grandfather were fortunate to survive the big accident, but unfortunately, Nyat Vin's father did not make it and passed away as a result. Nyat Vin wanted to carry on his grandfather's legacy, and he was in the process of writing couplets for a customer. He took out a piece of paper and began to contemplate the death of his high school principal. He wanted to write a couplet in honor of his teacher, but after sitting for a long time, he could only write a single line. In reality, his teacher had been a truly good person. While Nyat Vin was writing calligraphy, a thick black fog suddenly rose into the sky, catching the attention of this mysterious guest. This unusual cloud of smoke had drawn his attention and led him to Nyat Vin's house. In the middle of the night, while Nyat Vin was still in a daze, he sensed that someone was approaching him. When he finally opened his eyes, he found a disheveled man before him. The man's body bore wounds that looked horrifying, indicating that he had passed away some time ago. However, it was inexplicable how he could be alive again. After encountering Nyat Vin, this man began to gaze at Nyat Vin's house. He spent the entire day pleading with Nyat Vin for help. Nyat Vin wanted to assist, but when he asked how he could help, the man replied that he didn't know either. These two questions formed an endless loop, with no answers no matter how they were asked. In order to quickly find an answer, Nyat Vin silently followed the man outside because he also didn't know how to communicate verbally. So, the only way left was to use actions to seek answers. The man led Nyat Vin to the place where he had passed away and lay down in the same spot. Nyat Vin was unsure how to handle the situation, so he simply told the man to close his eyes and wished him peaceful rest. After saying this, Nyat Vin turned and walked away. However, just a few steps away, Nyat Vin looked back and noticed that the strange man had risen once again. He was standing and watching Nyat Vin from a distance. Nyat Vin decided not to return there. As long as this mysterious man didn't bother him anymore, that would be enough. However, on his way back home, Nyat Vin was stopped by Officer Tu An, who was on duty that night. She had seen from surveillance footage that Nyat Vin had gone to the scene of the traffic accident. Tu An's sixth sense had told her that the man in the video might be a suspect. Nyat Vin was taken to the police station for questioning. Under the pressure from Officer Tu An, Nyat Vin shared the strange story of the mysterious man who had come to his house. However, a story so bizarre was understandably hard for Tu An to believe. Nonetheless, Tu An couldn't detain Nyat Vin without concrete evidence, so she requested his phone number for future contact. Very quickly, Nyat Vin called the female police officer because the mysterious man had returned to his house. After Officer Tu An arrived, they approached the man together. She showed him a photo of the strange man, and after confirming that it was the same person, the man vigorously shook his head. He then stood up and explained that his soul wasn't the one in the picture. He had forgotten who he was. He was just borrowing this body to act. He had borrowed this corpse to find Nyat Vin. At this point, it seemed like the story had come full circle. The man needed Nyat Vin's help but didn't know what kind of help he needed. It appeared that this man would not be leaving Nyat Vin's house in the near future. Nyat Vin had no choice but to arrange temporary accommodation for him in a storage room and provide him with some clothes. Officer Tu An continued her investigation into the car accident on that fateful day. Her colleagues informed her that Mr. Trin had purchased a considerable amount of insurance for himself before the accident, raising suspicions that he might be feigning his death. Based on this reasoning, Tu An visited Mr. Trin's parents and colleagues. Mr. Trin had previously worked at a hospital, and according to what his parents said, he had a good relationship with his colleagues. They used to have lunch together regularly. However, the story from Mr. Trin's colleagues was quite different. They claimed not to know Mr. Trin at all and stated that they had never shared a meal with him before. This contradiction in accounts added a layer of mystery to the investigation. The conflicting statements from both sides made Officer Tu An's investigation quite challenging. Nyat Vin felt that this situation was reminiscent of the phenomenon of students being isolated during their school years. Perhaps Mr. Trin had always been socially isolated from his colleagues, and he lied to his parents to avoid causing them worry. This could explain the disparities in the accounts provided by his family and colleagues. On that same night, the strange man's heart suddenly emitted a signal that led him to a house, which happened to be Nyat Vin's parents' home. In the middle of the night, Nyat Vin's parents discovered that someone was in their living room and went to investigate. Upon realizing that it was their son, they wanted to approach him, but the strange man put up a defensive posture, keeping a distance between them. Suddenly, the peculiar man knelt down and then slowly lowered his head to the ground. In an instant, he leapt from the floor. Nyat Vin's mother began crying loudly, and Nyat Vin's father approached the spot where he had been standing. On the table was a dish of curry mixed with rice and raw vegetables. Curry rice was Mr. Trin's favorite dish when he was alive, and before he passed away, he had wanted to make it for his parents to thank them for their upbringing. As Nyat Vin and Tu An found Mr. Trin, red marks began spreading across his body. Mr. Trin pleaded with Nyat Vin to take him away to preserve the strength of his body, as he had exhausted all his energy earlier. After reuniting with his parents, Mr. Trin was filled with contentment, and he no longer clung to the mortal world. His soul's only remaining wish was unfulfilled. His soul remembered the days when he was alive, and ultimately, he remembered that he used to be a river god. Long ago, many people lived by the river, and they frequently prayed for his assistance to maintain peace in the region. However, all the villagers eventually moved elsewhere, and roads and bridges were built along the river. At this point, the river god had gradually lost his purpose. One night, a piece of paper floated gently on the river, and it was from that piece of paper that he sensed the power of the human heart. On that night, the fate guardian deity sensed the dark fog, which was the very power he needed. He followed that mist and found Nyat Vin, hoping that Nyat Vin could help him depart from this world. Hearing these words, Nyat Vin felt deeply troubled. He didn't understand what the power of the human heart meant, and he was unsure how to help this man depart from this world. Then, he remembered the words from his grandfather's customer, who had said that his grandfather's couplets were meaningful even though they were just lines of text. They had the ability to convey his grandfather's intentions not only to the deceased but also to the living, providing comfort. Nyat Vin realized that he needed to use the power of words and the intentions behind them to help this man. He decided to write something meaningful that could convey his intentions and offer solace to both the living and the departed. Nyat Vin decided to give it a try, even though he was still a young person with limited calligraphy skills. He took out his grandfather's calligraphy set and asked the strange man to choose any character he wanted. Suddenly, a gentle breeze blew through the storage room, scattering characters all over the floor. Nyat Vin began to grind the ink and started writing. At that moment, a red thread connected the man's hand to Nyat Vin's. As Nyat Vin wrote, a dark smoke enveloped the man's arm. When he finished writing the last character, the black smoke quickly wrapped around the man's body, clinging to him tightly. That night turned out to be the night when the strange man left Nyat Vin's house. Before departing, he smiled warmly at Nyat Vin and then floated over the roof of the house and disappeared into the night. The following day, the police discovered Mr. Trin's body under the bridge. When Officer Tu An went to investigate, Nyat Vin called her and asked her to inform Mr. Trin's parents to come and claim his body. It was their right to see their son's body one last time. For Nyat Vin, it was essential that Mr. Trin's parents had the opportunity to see their son's body for the last time. While it might be considered a common source of pain for others, for Nyat Vin, not being able to see one's loved ones for the last time was a lifetime of regret. He also wished to have the chance to see his own father one last time before his passing, even if it was through surveillance camera footage. There was progress in the investigation regarding Mr. Trin's isolation at his workplace. It was revealed that he had uncovered wrongdoing by his senior colleagues, which had led to their cruel retaliation. The perpetrators had tampered with Mr. Trin's blood pressure medication, causing him to fall into a coma while driving, resulting in the fatal car accident. The senior colleague responsible for this would face deserved consequences for their actions. Nyat Vin also received a token of gratitude from Officer Tu An, which was a stone lion. This item was the spiritual vessel of the river god, and it signified their appreciation for his help in the resolution of the case. Not long after bidding farewell to the strange man, another bizarre incident occurred. This time, it involved Nyat Vin's childhood friend from high school, Quang Nien, who had turned against him. When they crossed paths again, they exchanged intense glances filled with hostility. After Quang Nguyen moved closer to Nyat Vin's home, Nyat Vin's father, who ran a noodle shop, asked Nyat Vin to write a few words for him. Despite being rivals, Quang Nguyen couldn't refuse his father's request, so he distributed the leaflets with Nyat Vin's calligraphy. Quang Nguyen, now a medical student, had been distributing the leaflets for half a day when he received a message and hurriedly went to the forensic laboratory. Upon entering, he noticed a pile of dried flowers, which had been under his feet all day. He picked up one of the dried flowers and asked a girl nearby about it. Strangely, it seemed that only he could see the dried flowers, no one else noticed them. The girl even thought that Quang Nguyen was giving her a heart as a romantic gesture. That night, as Quang Nguyen returned home and shared a meal of noodles with Nyat Vin's mother and Nyat Vin, they noticed petals of flowers falling around them. Quang Nguyen observed that Nyat Vin was also looking in the direction of the falling petals. Nyat Vin's fearful expression confirmed to Quang Nguyen that he could also see these phenomena. Nyat Vin admitted that he could see these things, and even more than Quang Nguyen. The origin of the dried flowers was a tree, under which stood a woman dressed in ancient attire. However, it seemed that only Nyat Vin could see this mysterious woman. As Nyat Vin was still in a daze, Quang Nguyen quickly picked up a withered flower and asked Nyat Vin if he could also see the flower in his hand. At that moment, Nyat Vin's mother entered the room, unable to see the dried flower. She only saw Nyat Vin's hand raised, resembling a heart shape. Her heart raced, thinking that Quang Nguyen was confessing his feelings to Nyat Vin. Suddenly, Nyat Vin ran out of the house and called his two friends to the location of the car accident that occurred 2 years ago. When they arrived, Nyat Vin burst into tears because he could see many ghosts and spirits. However, he couldn't understand why he couldn't see his own father, the person he most wanted to meet. Nyat Vin cried out on the street for a long time until his two friends were able to bring him back home. After Nyat Vin's mother learned about his distress, she was puzzled about how to help him. Meanwhile, Quang Nguyen kept seeing withered flowers every day and eventually discovered the letter that Nyat Vin had written. This led Quang Nguyen to start bothering Nyat Vin, and a strange phenomenon occurred before his eyes. Whenever he raised the letter Nyat Vin had written, the withered flowers would appear, and when he lowered the letter, the flowers would vanish. Quang Nguyen was determined to find out what was happening. Nyat Vin could see the direction where the flower petals fell, and he described to Quang Nguyen that there was a girl sitting under the ancient tree. However, Quang Nguyen couldn't see anything. He only felt a chilling sensation down his spine, leaving him feeling helpless. Nyat Vin asked the girl to express her wishes, and she wanted Nyat Vin to write a name for her. The problem was that she didn't know Nyat Vin's name, which seemed to make things difficult. To prove to Quang Nguyen that there was indeed a girl next to him, Nyat Vin started sketching the girl's image on paper. Eventually, Quang Nguyen was able to see the girl when he saw the tattoo. This sight filled him with fear, and he jumped up, muttering to himself, before running outside. Vexed by Quang Nguyen's actions and the consequences they brought, Nyat Vin went in search of Quang Nguyen. He angrily scolded him for bringing that girl to his house. However, Nyat Vin also felt a sense of responsibility to help her and was determined to fulfill his duty by taking her away. Nyat Vin then followed Quang Nguyen to the school's forensic laboratory, where he saw the withered flower for the first time. This laboratory had been in operation for 7 years, and normally, after dissections were performed on cadavers, the bodies gradually decomposed like any other. However, this anonymous man's body seemed to possess a self-healing capability. Despite 7 years passing, his body showed no signs of decay. Rumors about this man had been spreading, with the strongest rumor being that he was a former member of the criminal underworld, evident from a large tattoo on his back. Quang Nguyen and his senior colleagues turned the man's body over, revealing a painting that surprised Nyat Vin. The painting depicted the woman sitting under the ancient tree. At this point, the girl spoke to Nyat Vin, explaining that the body used to be in good condition, and she had used the petals from the tree to heal it. However, the petals on the tree had started to wither, and she hoped that Nyat Vin could help her find the name of this man. If not, the body would eventually end up like all the other cadavers and be cremated. In their quest to uncover the identity of the man, Nyat Vin and Quang Nguyen enlisted the help of Tu An. Tu An, upon seeing the drawing made by Nyat Vin, was able to visualize the appearance of the woman. Although she was initially frightened, having Quang Nguyen by her side reassured her, allowing her to regain her composure. The three of them, a ghost, a living person, and a medium, sat down to discuss and record any available information about the man. Tu An discovered that the man had been discovered deceased 4 years ago, with the cause of death being heart disease. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any further details about him. The girl added that she could hear the words spoken by the man. 7 years before the man got his tattoo, he felt deeply regretful for not being able to complete it. As the group discussed the man's tattoo, they split into 2 teams. One team went to search for the person who had given him the tattoo, while the other team headed to an area where homeless people gathered. Nyat Vin asked the people there if they had seen the man. Quickly, they found a lead among the homeless individuals. A man who had been wandering for many years remembered the past. Many years ago, he used to wear a suit with a tie and appeared here. However, he never spoke, he just sat silently. Occasionally, he brought some food with him. Later, an old man approached and struck up a conversation with him. After talking, they found out that all of the man's relatives had passed away, and he seemed very lonely. That's why he came to this place. Perhaps he was only seeking the feeling of having someone to accompany him. When everyone under the bridge had fallen asleep, he quietly left. Nyat Vin asked for the man's name, but the old man just shook his head in resignation. He expressed that they were just people abandoned by the world, and what use did names have anyway? Not long after, Nyat Vin and the police managed to find the address of the tattoo artist. The tattoo artist described the man as very peculiar. When he entered the shop, he seemed to be in a hurry and immediately pointed at the tattoo design on the wall. He wanted to tattoo the image of the woman under the ancient tree onto his back. He didn't seem to care about the specifics of the design. What he wanted was simply to have the presence of a person beside him, someone he could be friends with. Regarding the tattoo, he had only one request, to make the face of the woman not too beautiful, just an ordinary woman. He planned to come back and add color to the tattoo when he had the money, gradually making it more beautiful. But he never showed up again. The tattoo artist showed them the rough sketch drawn by the customer, which also had the name of a company on it. Nyat Vin chuckled because the sketch had the name of a company on it. The presence of the company name on the rough sketch drawn by the customer raised some questions. Nyat Vin suspected that these two leads might be connected. However, they were running out of time to preserve the man's body, and the condition of the ancient woman's body was also deteriorating. Kwang Nian, who was in class at the time, saw the woman and rushed to the autopsy room to prevent the head of the department and others from taking the body away for cremation. He explained that they were close to finding a clue to her identity. He argued that if someone had passed away without even knowing their own name, it would be incredibly tragic and painful. Moved by his words, Kwang Nian's senior colleagues and superiors decided to inject a type of medication into the man. This medication would slow down the process of decomposition. At this point, Nyat Vin had located the company but encountered resistance from the person in charge, who was uncooperative and impatient. As Nyat Vin was preparing to leave, he noticed a commotion in the lobby. A taxi driver was distributing flyers and demanding an insurance payout from the company. Nyat Vin immediately recognized the taxi driver as someone who had likely worked at the company for a long time. It seemed that they might know the mysterious man. Without hesitation, Nyat Vin rushed over and managed to get into the taxi with the driver. Their interaction escalated into a confrontation as Nyat Vin tried to persuade the driver to help him. After their encounter, they were taken to the police station. The taxi driver originally didn't want to get involved in any complicated matters. However, on his way home, he happened to pass by a bridge and saw a man in a suit from a distance. He also noticed another person in Western attire distributing food to people in the vicinity. These images triggered memories from many years ago. The taxi driver recognized that the man driving the car was his former superior. In his memories, the young man was lonely but had a very kind heart. Whenever the taxi driver had to work late, the young man would stay and keep him company, just to prevent him from feeling lonely. Every time the taxi driver passed by that bridge, he saw the young man happily interacting with others. Unintentionally, he shared this story with his colleagues at the company. Surprisingly, the next day, the entire company was in turmoil. The young man was also fired from the company, using this incident as an excuse, even though the real reason was the perception of his mediocre skills. The company seized the opportunity to terminate his employment. The taxi driver now felt guilty, as he didn't realize that his innocent words would lead to the young man losing his job. After losing his job, the young man left behind his employee ID and some other items at the taxi driver's place. To apologize, the taxi driver visited the young man's house. He arrived just as the neighbors were urging the young man to clear the trash in front of his door. It was then that the taxi driver realized that the young man's parents had passed away one after the other while he was attending university. As a result, he had stopped going to school. Later on, the young man developed hoarding tendencies, and his belongings piled up inside his house. The neighbors often heard him talking to someone inside, and it was clear that there was no one else in the house except for him. The person he was talking to was undoubtedly the ancient woman. In these long, monotonous days, she was the one who kept him company and engaged in conversations with him. The following day, the taxi driver sent the young man's employee ID card and some of his belongings to the police station. He also included a letter describing the young man's life. At the end of the letter, the taxi driver expressed a heartfelt apology to the young man. He believed that this job opportunity might have been the young man's last chance to integrate into society, but his careless words had ruined it. Nyat Vin brought the young man's employee ID card back home and gave it to the ancient woman. She started to cry. After so many years, this was the first time she had seen Lam Vien Suyen's face, which was as beautiful as she had imagined. His name was also written below the photo, and Nyat Vin immediately took out a drawing box, ink, and paper. With all his heart, he wrote a couplet. The power of the pen converged into a swirl of black smoke, which rose into the sky. After a moment, the smoke returned and enveloped both Nyat Vin and the ancient woman. Finally, she met the person she could never forget. The girl shed tears, smiled, and then dissolved into the wind. At the same time, in the anatomy lab of the school, Lam Veen Suyen's body quickly dried up and lost its original shape. At the school, after each anatomy dissection, the institution would organize memorial services for the bodies. Today, Lam Veen Suyen was among them. Those who came to pay their respects included Nyat Vin and his friends, as well as the homeless people from under the bridge, the taxi driver, and the tattoo artist. After the farewell ceremony that day, the old homeless man approached Nyat Vin and introduced himself formally. Upon hearing Lam Veen Suyen's story, the old man realized something profound. Even though we live in this world with seemingly nothing, at the very least, we should have a name. Because, sooner or later, every person departs from this world, and their physical bodies may disappear entirely. There may not be anyone left to remember their names. However, if just one friend remembers their name, the departed will live on forever in the hearts of their friends. That night, Nyat Vin had a dream about a man who used a pen to write in midair. The man wrote 4 words, Dak Thien Ki Than. Many shadowy figures surrounded him, pleading for help incessantly. Nyat Vin woke up suddenly, still holding a burnt piece of paper. This was the same scrap of paper given to him by the ancient woman. The people who sought his help had all obtained similar pieces of paper from individuals they encountered. Moreover, they sensed a strange power emanating from these scraps. Coincidentally, Nyat Vin's handwriting seemed to carry an incredibly eerie force, which was why they had turned to him for assistance. Quang Nien was still curious about the existence of the ancient woman and who she really was. He had asked her about this matter before, and the woman had replied that she was the embodiment of human obsession. According to legend, when someone missed a deceased loved one too much, they would leave behind an object to express their feelings, and this woman was evidence of that tradition. Upon hearing this, Nyat Vin couldn't help but reflect on his own beliefs. He had always clung to the hope that he might one day reunite with his father. Perhaps, one day, he would indeed meet his father again. After Lam Veen Suyen was cremated, Quang Nguyen brought Nyat Vin to the cemetery to visit his mother's grave. However, when they were returning, it was already too late, so they had to ask Little Ann to drive a police car to pick them up and take them home. On the way back, Nyat Vin asked Little Ann if there was any way to help him find the video of the bus accident from that year. At this moment, Little Ann hesitated and shook his head, indicating that it was not possible. That night, a man walked through a small street, and suddenly, there was a tornado on the ground. It then transformed into the shape of a boy holding the hand of that man. They walked together on the street. The man looked puzzled and turned to look at the boy, but very quickly, he realized the situation. Afterward, the man took the boy home. The next day, Nyat Vin once again took out his ink and came to write a sign for Quang Nguyen's father's restaurant. Suddenly, the ink strokes turned into a cloud of black smoke and drifted into the air. This cloud of smoke was attracting the attention of people passing by on the street. The image of the father and son on the sidewalk seemed to be about to move. After finishing writing the sign for Quang Nguyen's father, he helped him. Upon returning home, Nyat Vin saw a man who seemed to be from the underworld, and the man's flesh was slowly turning into stone, which looked terrifying. He spoke the familiar phrases like others who came to find Nyat Vin, pleading for help. Nyat Vin couldn't shed tears, and his senses were overwhelmed, making him look extremely distressed. He realized he was once again entangled in something bizarre and immediately turned to run away. However, the man refused to let Nyat Vin go and chased after him, blocking his path at every turn. He unexpectedly caused the ground to rise, forcing Nyat Vin to kneel down. This video spread widely on social media, and Nyat Vin suffered greatly from the torment. With no other option, Nyat Vin had to accept the man's plea. He went to the police station to discuss this with Little Ann, hoping that she could help him locate the whereabouts of the child. However, when Little Ann looked at the picture of the child, she remained silent. She told Nyat Vin not to joke like this and then directly escorted him out of the police station. Her attitude infuriated the man turned into stone. While Little Ann was walking normally, she suddenly tripped and fell flat on the ground in front of him. Her posture at that moment seemed as if she was bowing to the man in front of her. Nyat Vin reminded Little Ann that she had already been targeted by the man, and it would be better to cooperate with him obediently. On that night, Little Ann came to Nyat Vin's house. After Nyat Vin sketched the image of the man, Little Ann immediately recognized the man's appearance. After regaining her composure, she began to question him and showed a picture of the missing child. It turned out that the image of the child was drawn on the road. The man began to explain, "Once upon a time, on this street, there was an intersection where accidents frequently occurred. After one man's child had an accident at that intersection, he placed a large stone there and prayed for the safety of all children crossing the street, so that no more tragic accidents would occur. After the stone was placed at the intersection, the area became much safer, and accidents decreased significantly. However, a few years later, this road needed reconstruction, and the stone was removed by the construction crew. But a kind-hearted police officer, feeling guilty, took the broken pieces of the stone and scattered them all over the road. road, hoping that the stone could continue to protect the street. Furthermore, on the scattered stone fragments, he painted the image of two fathers holding their child's hand to signify that this road was safe for pedestrians. However, due to the rapid road expansion by the construction company, the road was narrowed, and the image of the father was covered by asphalt. Only the child in the picture remained. So, that night, it transformed into a figure following people home. The person seeking Nyat Vin's help was indeed the father from the picture, also known as the guardian spirit of that street. He handed Nyat Vin a piece of paper and explained that he had been drawn to this place by the paper, seeking Nyat Vin's assistance. However, the father and Nyat Vin immediately got into an argument, and the father had the power to break Nyat Vin's wall to protect his home. In the end, he decided to entrust the hot-headed guardian spirit to Quang Nguyen, Nyat Vin and Little Anne, along with the guardian spirit, then went to investigate the surveillance cameras on the accident-prone stretch of road to find out who had led the child away. They quickly located the man who had led the child away on the fateful night. However, Nyat Vin unintentionally discovered something on Little Anne's computer. It turned out that Little Anne had found the video footage of the accident involving Nyat Vin's family from that year but had not shown it to him. Nyat Vin felt a bit frustrated and believed that Little Anne was trying to protect him, fearing that watching the video again would cause him more emotional harm. However, from Nyat Vin's perspective, it wasn't about further harm, it was a way to untangle the knot in his heart. In the end, Little Anne decided to let Nyat Vin watch the surveillance video from that year, but she had one request for him. She insisted that he must prepare himself mentally and be strong before opening and watching it. Of course, Nyat Vin agreed to her request. Based on the surveillance video, the people discussing the man were sure that his name was Tu Mo. A year prior, his child had tragically died by jumping from a building. He had previously reported the case to the police, and after obtaining Tu Mo's address, Quang Nguyen and Nyat Vin had been monitoring him throughout the day. On that particular day, Tu Mo had taken the child outside, but no one could see the child. His actions had left everyone feeling extremely puzzled. Not only did he talk to an empty seat next to him on the bus, but he also served food to the child sitting across from him in a restaurant, even though no one was there. Furthermore, when buying a ticket to an amusement park, he purchased an extra child's ticket. He even stood in front of a ticket vendor, asking the child which ticket they preferred. The behavior of Tu Mo was indeed bizarre and raised many questions. On that night, Quang Nguyen and Nyat Vin returned home together. Quang Nguyen's father approached to inquire about his well-behaved and studious son, only to find out that he had skipped school to go to the amusement park with Nyat Vin. He was quite shocked by this revelation. Nyat Vin's mother also came to inquire about the situation. She was delighted to see the growing bond between the two children. However, now Nyat Vin was no longer concerned with what both sets of parents had to say or think. His sole focus was on Tu Mo and the child. So, he went alone to Tu Mo's house and waited outside for Tu Mo to return home. Despite the heartbreaking nature of the situation, Nyat Vin wanted to awaken Tu Mo. He told Tu Mo that the child beside him was not his son and wasn't even a human being. Tu Mo should not remain entranced any longer and needed to regain his senses. He should return the child to where it came from. Tu Mo, with a heart full of scars, locked Nyat Vin outside and struggled internally over whether he should return the child or not. In the end, he chose to bathe and care for the child, taking it to a nearby park for a walk. Tu Mo expressed his gratitude to the boy for being with him for these past few days, as the child had filled the void left by the loss of his own son. Tu Mo hugged the child tightly and then turned away and left. After his son's passing, Tu Mo's life had become incredibly dull. For a long time, he had been going back and forth between work and home, often passing by the stretch of road where he had seen the father and son. He couldn't help but be reminded of his own child. This time, Tu Mo bid farewell to the child, and as a result, the child lost its human form and turned into a mist. Nyat Vin sat beside Tu Mo and gave him a drawing he had created himself, depicting two fathers holding their child's hand. Nyat Vin hoped that Tu Mo would stop blaming himself and regain trust in the world. While losing a loved one is incredibly painful, those who remain should not dwell on that pain. Nyat Vin thought about his own father, who had passed away when he was just a rebellious 17-year-old. At that time, he didn't have many fond memories of his father, but he came to realize that life was full of beauty, and the unfortunate events were just motivation for personal growth. After listening to Nyat Vin's words, Tu Mo remembered what his own son had whispered to him during those past few days. His son had expressed how happy he was to be taken to various places and experience new things with his father. Tu Mo closed his eyes, and the image of him taking his child to the amusement park once again played in his mind. Those few days had been enough to lift his spirits and help him find solace. Nyat Vin's words and the memory of his time spent with his son had a profound impact on Tu Mo, helping him begin the process of healing and finding peace. After resolving the guardian spirit's concerns, it was now Nyat Vin's turn to investigate the origin of the piece of paper. The guardian spirit had mentioned that the source of the paper was similar to those before, all claiming it had been given to them by a very old person. Nyat Vin confirmed that an old man or woman had indeed given it to him, and the guardian spirit insisted it was the latter. Nyat Vin recalled a female ghost from his childhood who used to follow his grandfather. She appeared to have the appearance of an old woman. On that day, while he was working on his commissioned painting on an electrical box, his mother called to inform him that his grandfather's health had taken a turn for the worse. Nyat Vin rushed to the hospital, thankfully getting there in time for his grandfather to receive proper medical care. On that night, Nyat Vin stayed at the hospital to take care of his grandfather. He had another dream of the female ghost from his childhood who used to follow his grandfather throughout the day. At this point, his grandfather's speech was also becoming weak and incoherent. When Nyat Vin woke up, he realized that his grandfather's hand had been placed on his own hand, as if his grandfather had awoken at some point during the night and made the gesture. Nyat Vin felt very uneasy, so he went to find Quang Nguyen and asked him to video chat while he slept that night. The purpose was to monitor if anything unusual happened beside him while he was sleeping. Quang Nguyen, despite feeling a bit frustrated, didn't refuse Nyat Vin's request. He spent the whole night watching over Nyat Vin as he slept, and eventually, he also fell asleep himself without realizing it. The night was quiet and calm, and nothing unusual happened beside Nyat Vin. However, something strange was unfolding at the electrical box. By midnight, the lines and drawings that Nyat Vin had created had completely turned into a thick black smoke that rose into the sky. It was unclear which direction the smoke dispersed. Interestingly, the doll standing by the window witnessed this entire bizarre scene. The next day, Nyat Vin went to collect his payment from the client for his artwork, but the client repeatedly shook his head in refusal. It turned out that the electrical box had completely returned to its original state, empty and devoid of any drawings, just like Nyat Vin's friend's uncertain future. Feeling disheartened, Nyat Vin sat down on the ground and couldn't help but reflect on his own uncertain fate. He considered himself an educated person who had ended up in a low-paying part-time job, and even in that job, he couldn't succeed. Finding a new job was no easy task, and he began to doubt his ability to make a better life for himself. Then, he glanced at his friend Quang Nguyen, who was academically talented, and whom Nyat Vin had sought help from to plan his life. Nyat Vin had been relying on Quang Nguyen's ability to come up with a life plan for him, considering that he had been planning for his future for a long time. Quang Nguyen had even identified suitable jobs for Nyat Vin based on his personality, suggesting roles like becoming a priest or a temple abbot, or perhaps even working as a psychic medium. However, before Quang Nguyen could finish his thoughts, Nyat Vin abruptly picked him up and carried him out of the house. On that same evening, Nyat Vin decided to review the CCTV footage of the accident involving Tu An, with Quang Nguyen and Tu An accompanying him. As they began to watch the video, Nyat Vin noticed something very peculiar. Initially, his grandfather had appeared to be in good health, but suddenly he collapsed as if he had been drugged. This unusual behavior raised suspicions, and the transportation company responsible for the incident also had doubts about this abnormality. They suspected that Nyat Vin's grandfather might have been drugged before the plane collided with the car. Nyat Vin closely observed the footage and slowed it down slightly. He discovered that the ghostly female figure was standing beside his grandfather at that moment, and seconds later, his grandfather lost consciousness. Feeling uneasy, Nyat Vin didn't want to discuss this with Quang Nguyen and Tu An and tried to avoid them. Nyat Vin couldn't stop replaying the image of the female ghost standing next to his grandfather in his mind. On that same evening, he also noticed a peculiar little girl standing near the gate of his house, as if she were waiting for him to come down. The appearance of the little girl filled him with intense fear, making it impossible for him to sink into sleep. Desperate, Nyat Vin had to muster the courage to climb onto Quang Nguyen's bed, as he couldn't bring himself to go back to his own. Quang Nguyen found this situation both amusing and sympathetic, but seeing Nyat Vin's pitiable state, he couldn't bring himself to chase him away. They ended up sharing the tiny bed together. However, on that very night, the female ghost once again entered Nyat Vin's dreams. This time, she spoke to him, saying that his grandfather had been cold-blooded and indifferent throughout his entire life. Faced with the pleas of a supernatural being, he only uttered 4 words: compassionate and kind, in an enigmatic manner. However, when the ghost looked at Nyat Vin, she realized that he was nothing like his cold and indifferent grandfather. The next morning, when Nyat Vin woke up, he immediately asked Quang Nguyen what compassionate and kind meant. Quang Nguyen explained that it meant being self-centered and not caring about the life or death of others. Later, Nyat Vin quietly climbed back to his room through Quang Nguyen's window. However, their parents, who were standing below, had witnessed the entire incident. The following night, Nyat Vin once again climbed into Quang Nguyen's bed. In the middle of the night, he suddenly woke up and stood by Quang Nguyen's window, looking down below. The strange girl was still standing outside the gate. Despite finding her somewhat peculiar, Nyat Vin decided not to take any action and returned to bed. Since that day, Nyat Vin slept in Quang Nguyen's room every night. The strange girl continued to visit Nyat Vin's house, waiting under the gate, day after day. After a few days, Nyat Vin noticed that the girl had appeared for the north time, and Quang Nien had been awake for some time. Quang Nien looked at Nyat Vin's expression, sensing that a new ghost had been bothering Nyat Vin. Quang Nien felt it was strange and was curious about how this ghost could scare Nyat Vin so much that he had to spend every night sleeping with him on a tiny bed. Upon hearing this, Nyat Vin shared the story of the female ghost who had always followed his grandfather. He explained that the ghost hoped Nyat Vin would be different from his grandfather and help the souls that came to seek his assistance. However, Nyat Vin had his doubts, suspecting that the accident from the past might have been caused by that female ghost. Hence, he was determined not to meet her. But the next day, while Nyat Vin was out delivering food, he happened to see a mannequin in a shop. This mannequin looked remarkably similar to the girl who often appeared outside his house, even down to the hairpin. Nyat Vin stared at the mannequin for a while and couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. He decided to strike up a conversation with the girl. That evening, he invited the girl to his house and proceeded to draw her portrait on paper. After seeing the drawing, Quang Nien could finally see a beautiful schoolgirl standing before him. Nyat Vin felt a strong desire to help the girl, so he offered her a box of letters. However, little did he know that what the girl needed wasn't Nyat Vin's letters. She slumped into a corner and sighed heavily. Nevertheless, Nyat Vin was determined to assist her because he considered himself a good person and wanted to see things through to the end. The next day, Nyat Vin took Quang Nien to the shop displaying the mannequin to inquire further about its background. The shop owner, Ms. Ha, explained that the mannequin was created by her own daughter, who had been missing for 7 years. Nobody knew her whereabouts. Seeing Nyat Vin and Quang Nien showing interest in her daughter's work, Ms. Ha's eyes lit up, and she handed them a flyer with information about her daughter, hoping to find new leads to locate the girl. It seemed that Ms. Ha had never given up hope of finding her daughter. However, Nyat Vin didn't disclose any information. After a brief conversation, he and Quang Nien left Ms. Ha's house. Back at home, the young girl expressed her wish. She hoped that Nyat Vin could help find Ms. Ha's daughter and then release her. When the child went missing, she still had the appearance of a primary school student. Because of her deep longing for her daughter, every year, Ms. Ha would imagine what her daughter would look like when she grew up and design appropriate outfits for the mannequin. So, the current appearance of the girl was not really hers. It was just an image of Ms. Ha's imagination. However, the girl had no emotional connection with Ms. Ha and felt confused about her current appearance. Therefore, she didn't want to exist in the human world any longer. Nyat Vin took the flyer with information about Ms. Ha's daughter back home and sought Tu An's help to handle this matter. Quickly, Tu An found information about the disappearance of Ms. Ha's daughter. She stood up to analyze it for Nyat Vin and Quang Nien to hear. Ms. Ha's daughter went missing when she was just an elementary school student. She was kidnapped on her way to school, and the kidnappers later called Ms. Ha to demand ransom. They instructed her to bring the money to a specific location. However, even after delivering the money as instructed, Ms. Ha received no information about her daughter's whereabouts. It was only then that she reported the incident to the police. At that time, the police suspected that individuals around the girl were involved in the crime. When the mannequin saw a photo of a man, she suddenly identified him as Mr. Trong, who happened to be a friend of Ms. Ha and her husband. A week before, Mr. Trong had visited Ms. Ha's shop and stood there for a while, seemingly observing something. The next day, Tu An called Ms. Ha's husband and Mr. Trong to have a conversation. It turned out that after their daughter went missing, Ms. Ha had placed the mannequin made by her daughter outside the door. However, Ms. Ha's husband felt it was quite bizarre, and it made passers-by point fingers, thinking something strange was happening in their household. The two of them had countless arguments about this issue. Finally, Ms. Ha compromised and removed the mannequin. However, just a week ago, Mr. Trong saw the mannequin placed outside again, and he was furious. He asked Ms. Ha's husband why he was so angry about seeing the mannequin outside. When Tu An inquired about the matter, Mr. Trong explained that he had considered the girl like a granddaughter to him. He found Ms. Ha's actions somewhat troubling, as if she were mentally unwell. Moreover, he did it partly for the sake of his wife, Tu Mai. Tu Mai used to be a worker at Ms. Ha's shop, and after their daughter went missing, she and Mr. Trong got married. They also had a child together. Although not explicitly stated, Tu An understood that there might be some illicit relationship between Ms. Ha's husband and Tu Mai. Afterward, Tu An started assigning tasks. She told Quang Nien to approach Tu Mai's daughter, named Han. Meanwhile, Nyat Vin began investigating Tu Mai's shop. After a day of investigation, Quang Nien and Nyat Vin reported their findings to Tu An. Quang Nien, being quick-witted and intelligent, was able to approach Han swiftly, and they scheduled another meeting for the next day. Kwang Nien would act as a tutor to teach Han. However, Nyat Vin's situation was not as favorable. He went to Tiu Mai's coffee shop and ordered the cheapest coffee but spent the whole day without finding an opportunity to approach her. Hearing this, Tiu An handed Nyat Vin a note and instructed him to return to the coffee shop the next day to continue monitoring the situation. She also told him to bring his pen to sketch anything suspicious he might come across. Nyat Vin then shared his thoughts, expressing a sense of unease about the coffee shop, feeling that the place was indeed strange. Tiu An also confessed to having similar feelings after her conversation with Mr. Trong and Ms. Ha's husband. She felt something was off but couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The next day, while Tiu An was analyzing the clues, her friend Ha Chan paid her a visit. During their conversation, Ha Chan learned about the issue Tiu An was curious about. She suggested that they listen to the recorded conversation as an outsider's perspective might help shed new light on the matter. After listening to the recording, Ha Chan quickly identified something strange. An Trong frequently mentioned his daughter in front of Ms. Ha's husband. Typically, if a father has lost his daughter, he would be deeply saddened and avoid talking about her to prevent further emotional distress for his close friends. However, An Trong seemed to disregard this sensitivity and freely discussed his daughter. This raised suspicions, and Ha Chan suggested that Tiu An should investigate An Trong's family situation further. The next day, Nyat Vin was once again staking out the coffee shop. He sat there until the coffee shop closed, and the employees began ushering customers out. Suddenly, all the lights in the coffee shop went out, and there was a strange phenomenon in the sky. Nyat Vin then went to Kai Ha's house and asked the girl sitting outside to join him. Together, they went to the coffee shop, and Nyat Vin picked the lock to gain access. Upon entering, the girl felt a shiver down her spine because the coffee shop's layout was identical to Kai Ha's place. It appeared that the furnishings and decorations in this coffee shop were all copied from Kai Ha's establishment. It seemed that Tiu Mai had a penchant for copying other people's lifestyles. Nyat Vin couldn't help but be alarmed by the suspicion that Tiu Mai might have been involved in the kidnapping of Kai Ha's daughter. When Nyat Vin and the girl were about to leave the coffee shop, they unexpectedly encountered Tiu Mai waiting outside, who had called the police. She was preparing to have Nyat Vin arrested for unlawful housebreaking. Fortunately, Tiu An arrived just in time to intervene and explained that they needed Tiu Mai's cooperation for the investigation. Subsequently, they took Tiu Mai to the police station for further questioning. During Tiu An's investigation, it was discovered that there were many unexplained financial transactions associated with Tiu Mai's coffee shop. Tiu Mai claimed that these funds were donations from a close friend, but there were reasons to suspect that she was covering up something. Tiu An didn't have concrete evidence at that moment, so Tiu Mai was released pending further investigation. Tiu Mai was about to leave when she noticed a piece of paper in her car. She opened it and found sketches depicting the life journey of a girl. What surprised her was that as she flipped through the pages, each image corresponded to a certain age, and there was a striking resemblance between the girl in the drawings and herself. Tiu Mai felt like she was trapped inside the car and urgently wanted to get out of this eerie place. However, Kwang Nien and Nyat Vin suddenly appeared, blocking the car's doors. They showed her each page of the artwork, and on each page, a girl of the corresponding age appeared next to Tiu Mai. The last image was of the little girl who had gone missing 7 years ago. After some contemplation, Tiu Mai mustered the courage to confront the young girl. She gently stroked the girl's hair as tears streamed down her face. Finally, Tiu Mai summoned the strength to face her own guilt and fear, and she made a phone call to the police, confessing to the location where the child was buried. At the police station, Tiu Mai confessed to the process of killing the little girl. It happened on a day like any other when Tiu Mai returned home after work and saw the girl heading into an alley at the end of the street. The girl was painting an old green wardrobe, and Tiu Mai sat down beside her to strike up a conversation. She told the girl, Ahan, that her daughter liked the same hairpin and asked if she could have one. However, Ahan replied that she had asked her mother, and her mother had said no. Tiu Mai felt a surge of jealousy, even though the girl's words were innocuous. Her feelings toward Kai Ha were complex and hard to put into words. She desired to have Kai Ha's tailor shop and her sewing skills. Furthermore, she harbored intense envy for Kai Ha's seemingly perfect career and life. At that moment, Ahan had finished her painting, and Tiu Mai decided to carry out her sinister act. While the girl was playing inside the wardrobe, Tiu Mai heartlessly locked her inside. Later that night, overwhelmed by guilt, Tiu Mai returned to the abandoned house and discovered that the girl had died inside the wardrobe. Tiu Mai, driven by fear, didn't confess her crime but instead waited until midnight when nobody was watching. Then she buried the girl on a hill. She later orchestrated the kidnapping for ransom scheme, using the money to establish her own business. Upon hearing Tiu Mai's confession, Tiu An felt deep sympathy for the little girl. Tiu Mai's actions had taken the life of an innocent and kind-hearted girl. However, Tiu Mai was unaware that the girl had intentionally dropped her hairpin in front of Tiu Mai's house, hoping that Ahan could find it. Ahan had turned the hairpin into a phone charm, still treasuring it to this day. After the police quickly located the girl's body, a strange occurrence took place. The girl had not disappeared entirely. It wasn't until one day when Nyat Vin came to visit Kai Ha, and she asked him about how the girl had grown up. When Nyat Vin described the girl's appearance, Kai Ha led him to the back door and confided in him her secret. Kai Ha revealed that she had created a mannequin in the likeness of her daughter every year. There was only one mannequin she had ever made, the one that resembled her daughter when she went missing as a young elementary school student. The reason for this was that the first time she met Nyat Vin, he described the girl as a tall, thin child. This led Kai Ha to speculate that her daughter had already passed away. However, Kai Ha believed that even in the afterlife, the deceased would continue to grow normally. So, she had Nyat Vin help her in this theatrical production. When Kai Ha saw the mannequin, she couldn't hold back her tears, deeply moved by her own pure-hearted intentions. Nyat Vin drew an image of the girl on paper, and when Kai Ha looked up, she saw her daughter standing before her. Kai Ha's face was filled with tears, but she couldn't hide her faint smile. However, the girl was not pleased to meet Kai Ha despite the emotional reunion. That night, the girl came to ask Nyat Vin for forgiveness, questioning why he allowed Kai Ha to see her. Nyat Vin replied that he did it because of Kai Ha and to relieve the resentment in the girl's heart. Because, in the end, Nyat Vin understood why the girl was resentful about him staying in the mortal world. It was not because the girl had any affection for Kai Ha, but because she envied Kai Ha's child. After Kai Ha's daughter passed away, Kai Ha had transformed the girl into her own daughter, and this had given rise to a sense of identity within the girl. While she grew in the world beyond, in Kai Ha's mind, she was always a child, making the girl feel constantly pitiful. It was clear to her that the person who traveled with Kai Ha was herself, yet she did not receive the affection of the other. So Nyat Vin allowed Kai Ha to see the girl, to etch her image deep into Kai Ha's mind, so that this girl would also have a place in Kai Ha's thoughts. Upon hearing Nyat Vin's explanation, the girl seemed to understand the matter. When Nyat Vin was about to take her away from this world, she suddenly changed her mind because she didn't know where she would go when she disappeared. Currently, she still lacked the courage to face this reality. Because Tu An had successfully solved this case, she received commendation from the police department. She was very happy afterward and invited Nyat Vin and Quang Nien to go for drinks to thank them for their help. While the three of them were celebrating at home, suddenly Nyat Vin opened his eyes wide and quickly rushed out, performing a series of actions at lightning speed. Quang Nien and Tu An didn't understand what was happening. In the hospital, Tu An's grandfather had just gone through a life-threatening situation and was being treated by doctors. Nyat Vin saw a black smoke appear next to him, and he quickly rushed to disperse the smoke. In his hand, there was a small black powder residue left. After the black smoke disappeared, Tu An's grandfather returned from the brink of death, and his body returned to its normal state. Nyat Vin was somewhat puzzled by whether this black powder was meant to harm or save the person. A few days later, Quang Nien told Nyat Vin that the warehouse where the girl had passed away now had an order to be demolished. Nyat Vin thought for a moment and then decided to go to the warehouse. He placed on the ground a few hairpins that the girl had liked. Just as he was preparing to leave, an old woman with silver hair appeared. Nyat Vin recognized this old woman as the female spirit who had often appeared beside his grandfather, but this time she didn't have the misty aura surrounding her anymore. She also hinted to Nyat Vin that she had seen the girl when she was alive and that the girl used to meet a few other people at that old, rundown warehouse. The old woman's words could be a new clue in the mystery. Nyat Vin immediately called Tu An and shared his suspicions that Tu Mai might not be the real murderer. There was a high possibility that someone else had killed Kai Ha's daughter. However, Tu An mentioned that her position was no longer as high as before, so she didn't want to take any further risks. Hearing this, Nyat Vin felt extremely disappointed. The following day, the female spirit came to Nyat Vin's house. She explained that she had not caused harm to Nyat Vin's grandfather but was actually trying to save him. When the bus had its accident, Nyat Vin's grandfather was supposed to die, but she had helped him keep his life. The same happened at the hospital yesterday. She was only trying to help him preserve his life. The female spirit had lived in the mortal world for many years, and now the only ones who could help her were Nyat Vin or Nyat Vin's grandfather. When the spirits with the pieces of paper came to Nyat Vin seeking help, it was she who directed them to him. She was the elderly person that the previous spirits often mentioned. She also claimed to know the truth about the girl's death, and if Nyat Vin agreed to help her, she would assist him in solving the case. However, Nyat Vin recalled his grandfather's advice, which he had mentioned repeatedly. Remember the phrase, Luke Bat Tong Tam. If you try to help others when you are not capable, you are pushing yourself into danger. Therefore, he hesitated and had not yet agreed to the old woman's request. That night, while Nyat Vin was sleeping, he sensed someone riding on his back. The same phenomenon occurred on the second night, but this time, he was prepared. He had placed a piece of paper beside him, and when he felt the writing on his back, he mimicked the strokes with his own hand. To his surprise, when he finished, it spelled out the words, "Save me, Nyat Vin." Nyat Vin was immediately filled with fear and broke out in a cold sweat. Fearing for his safety, he decided to take matters into his own hands and search for the real cause of Kai-ha's daughters. Tu An was also extremely uncomfortable with the situation. She spent the entire day pondering it and eventually decided to assist Nyat Vin in his investigation. This time, Tu An approached Tu Mai to inquire about the circumstances surrounding the day the girl had died. Tu Mai recalled that on that day, she had gone to the old warehouse, which was surrounded by dry, crumbling cement blocks. When she heard footsteps approaching, Kai-ha's daughter didn't turn around but instead spoke as if she knew who was following her. Tu An suspected that this person had been visiting the warehouse regularly to meet the girl. Furthermore, after some investigation, Tu An discovered that on the day of the incident, Mr. Trong had been following the girl. He was clearly aware of what Tu Mai had been doing but had chosen to keep it a secret. After sharing her findings with Tu Mai, Tu An couldn't hide the shock on her face, wondering why her husband knew so much about the situation. That evening, Tu An, Quang Nien, and Nyat Vin had arranged to meet. While they were preparing to discuss the case of the girl, Nyat Vin coldly produced a piece of paper, indicating that it was a new lead. Tu An hesitated for a moment but eventually accepted the paper and agreed to help Nyat Vin. However, upon examining the paper, she found the word, fuck, written on it. This was the word that the person who had approached Nyat Vin had wanted him to write. Tu An returned to the police station and quickly conducted research and analysis on the word, fuck. She found results indicating that it was the name of the owner of a factory. After divorcing his Thai nationality wife, this man had been raising his two twin children, Tu Kin and Tu Nin, on his own. Later, his company, owned by a fuck, went bankrupt. As a result, he began to vent his anger on the two children, and his family became labeled as a high-risk, dangerous family due to this behavior. The next day, the three of them arrived at a fuck's bankrupted factory, which was now in ruins. Nyat Vin's intuition led him to a cabinet, and suddenly, there were pink threads sneaking out from behind him. Nyat Vin was startled and stepped back, but he was threatened by whatever was behind him. The red thread ensnared him, and behind him was another boy who was hunched over on the ground. The two boys were connected by the pink thread. Nyat Vin was terrified and remained stunned on the ground for half a day. However, despite the shock, he continued to investigate the case and tried to visualize the two children standing in front of him. Tu An, upon seeing this, was equally astonished and wondered why there were two boys. According to the case file from 9 years ago, Tu Kin had passed away, and only her younger brother, Tu Nin, was alive. Quang Nien quickly figured out that the boy in front of them was an illusion, much like the case of Kai-ha's daughter. When Nyat Vin asked the boy in front of him if he was Tu Nin, he admitted that he wasn't. In the next moment, the boy behind him hugged him tightly and swiftly dragged him into the cabinet. In order to uncover what had happened 9 years ago between the two children, Tu Nin and Tu Kin, Tu An sought out the now grown-up Tu Nin to inquire about that year. Tu Nin explained that on that fateful evening, their father, a fuck, came home drunk and continued to torment the two children. He threw Tu Kin out of the house, and it was pouring rain that night. Tu Nin, through a crack in the door, saw his older brother shivering and suffering in the pouring rain outside. After uncovering the details of the incident from that day, Nyat Vin and Quang Nien also sought the opportunity to approach the two children. However, the children in need of help were unable to speak and could only communicate by writing with their fingers on Nyat Vin's back. Nyat Vin called upon his best friend to assist in deciphering what the children wanted to convey. At this point, Tu An received a message. After learning about what had happened on Nyat Vin's side, she invited Tu Nin to visit their father's old factory with her. However, Tu Nin did not want to revisit that painful place and immediately declined Tu An's invitation. Frustrated, Tu An explained that someone there could see his lost brother. She insisted that it was the spirit of Tu Kin and the illusion of Tu Nin because he didn't know that Tu Nin had been rescued. As an older brother, his instinct was to protect his younger sibling, and Tu Nin felt angry, thinking that Tu An was lying to him. It wasn't until Nyat Vin himself confirmed that Tu Nin was with him and that if Tu Nin wanted to communicate, he would write on Nyat Vin's back. Tu Nin had long forgotten those unpleasant memories, but when Nyat Vin mentioned them, they resurfaced in his mind. Back in that year, the two brothers, Tu Nin and Tu Kin, hid inside a cabinet, terrified and unable to speak. If they needed to communicate, they would draw on each other's backs. Hearing this, Tu Nin finally agreed to go to their father's old factory after Nyat Vin showed him a picture he had drawn. At the factory, Tu Nin used the Thai language to converse with his older brother. This time, Tu Kin, who had kept his head down from the beginning, slowly raised his head. Tu Nin embraced Tu Kin tightly and tearfully thanked his older brother for always protecting him. He credited his survival to his older brother's care. Now that their abusive father was in prison, there would be no more heart-wrenching incidents. Tu Kin could finally find peace. Upon hearing Tu Nin's words, Tu Kin's spirit shed tears. Witnessing the reunion of the two siblings was truly heart-wrenching for those present. Nyat Vin suddenly thought about how he needed to write a couplet to commemorate the occasion. However, a black mist suddenly enveloped him, causing the words he had written to dissolve into the wind, taking both Tu Kin and the illusion of Tu Nin with it as it dispersed. Before leaving, Tu An promised Tu Nin that she would investigate this matter thoroughly. It turned out that back then, Tu Nin had seen someone standing next to his brother, Tu Kin, near the door. This person had then covered Tu Kin's mouth and nose. At that moment, Tu Nin had only seen the perpetrator wearing a pair of white shoes with heart-shaped designs on them. Tu An analyzed that the individuals who would have been at the factory at that time were likely community social workers or volunteers, as they had a loving presence in the community. Because of this, she approached Hoang, the head of the social worker team, and asked if he knew anything about the white shoes with blood. Faced with this difficult problem and feeling helpless, Tu An turned to Ha Chan. Ha Chan offered her a pastry as they sat down to chat, allowing Tu An to both eat and share her thoughts. During their conversation, Ha Chan also learned about the existence of Nyat Vin. On that afternoon, Tu An went to find a Han to inquire about any information related to Kai Ha's daughter. However, a Han could only shake her head continuously and sat there crying without uttering a word. At that moment, Chu Nim Hoang sent a photo to Tu An. He had identified a suspicious person, who happened to be a volunteer that had participated in the rescue mission for the twin siblings back then. Tu An enlarged the photo and was surprised to see the person in question. It was Ha Chan. A Han also brought a new lead to the table. She mentioned that the girl in question was familiar with an older guy who had often given her sweets. All the clues now pointed towards Ha Chan, and the truth appeared to align with these findings. In that year, before Tu Mai left, Ha Chan had gone to that warehouse and killed Kai Ha's daughter. Once Tu An returned to the police department, she began to investigate this individual. She discovered that he had been present at the volunteer meetings of a welfare organization. If Tu An's deductions were correct, this person was responsible for both the deaths of Tu Kin and Kai Ha's daughter. Ha Chan's targets were children, and now, her claws were directed at Nyat Vin. Nyat Vin, following the old woman's request, quickly found the ancient object she was looking for. While he was conversing with Kwang Nian, suddenly, Ha Chan appeared before him. She introduced herself as Tu An's friend and claimed to have a gift for Tu An to celebrate his promotion. Believing that Ha Chan posed no danger, Nyat Vin let his guard down, even sitting in Ha Chan's car. However, to his surprise, as he relaxed for a moment, Ha Chan struck him unconscious, causing Nyat Vin to lose consciousness. At this moment, Kwang Nian, worried about Nyat Vin, called Tu An to ask if she knew someone named Ha Chan. He mentioned that Nyat Vin had talked to him about someone who claimed to be Tu An's friend and had come to inquire about Nyat Vin. A while later, Kwang Nian tried calling Nyat Vin again but couldn't reach him. Tu An felt a lump in her throat because she remembered her earlier conversation with Ha Chan, where they mentioned making a special cake for Nyat Vin. Now, this statement seemed to have an ominous premonition. To find Nyat Vin, Kwang Nian suddenly remembered the existence of the female ghost beside his grandfather, a knowledgeable spirit who might be able to locate Nyat Vin. The spirit had a broader understanding, and Kwang Nian was sure she could help. He and Tu An decided to seek her out. They relied on the kind homeowner, who could see spirits and had shared drinks with the ghost in the past. Kwang Nian carefully brought the pieces of paper from the previous spirits and pieced them together to form the word, Thien. He placed the assembled word in front of the ghost, hoping it could assist them. However, the assembled pieces of the word seemed to float in the air without the presence of wind and suddenly burst into flames. Kwang Nian and Tu An looked up at the sky, where countless pink threads were falling down. These threads seemed to lead to a place where Nyat Vin might be. Without hesitation, the two of them ran as fast as they could toward the location where the threads were leading, hoping to find Nyat Vin. Nyat Vin found himself kidnapped by Ha Chan and taken to a science museum. Ha Chan revealed that she had learned from Tu An that Nyat Vin could see and guide the departed souls to their final resting place. She had brought Nyat Vin to the museum with the hope that he could help her younger brother, who was currently at the museum, find his way to the afterlife. However, Nyat Vin couldn't see any spirits there. He could only see the red threads hanging from the upper floor. To prolong the time and gather more information, Nyat Vin requested that Ha Chan share the story of her younger brother with him. She reluctantly began to recount the story. Ha Chan's younger brother had been in poor health from a young age and suffered from various illnesses. He had a strong liking for sweets, but due to his health issues, he couldn't indulge in them. Ha Chan, in an attempt to free her brother from his suffering, gave him a small amount of cake one day. However, in the next moment, she ended up killing her brother. Ha Chan believed she had done this to help her brother, thinking that death would be a relief for him. Nyat Vin was furious upon hearing this. He questioned why Ha Chan, being the older sibling, could commit such an act against her younger brother. He wondered why she didn't have any compassion for her own flesh and blood. He also mentioned that his own grandfather had been bedridden for 2 years, and he had never considered removing his life support. contrasting it with Ha Chan's actions. Ha Chan tried to justify her actions, explaining that she believed her brother's life would be miserable if he continued to live. She cited examples of Tu Kin, who would have lived her entire life under the shadow of her father, and Kai Ha's daughter, who faced teasing from her peers due to her weight. She argued that such lives were not worth living. However, Nyat Vin didn't agree with her reasoning. He couldn't comprehend how Ha Chan could lack empathy for her own sibling. In a moment of distraction, Nyat Vin pushed Ha Chan forcefully, causing her to lose consciousness with an ancient artifact he had found earlier. Nyat Vin realized that he needed to save himself and find a way out of this dangerous situation. At this moment, in the hospital, the ghost woman discovered that Nyat Vin's grandfather was still tightly holding the letter that Nyat Vin had left behind in his hand. It turned out that Nyat Vin had decided to take a different path from his grandfather. Nyat Vin understood why his grandfather had maintained a benevolent attitude towards the ghost woman. It was because he wanted to protect his family. However, with the hospital and the police by his side, Nyat Vin believed he could protect himself. The contents of the letter revealed that Nyat Vin agreed to fulfill the ghost woman's wish and also asked her to take his grandfather to his final resting place. After reading the letter, the ghost woman no longer attempted to maintain his grandfather's heartbeat. At this moment, the spirit of Nyat Vin's grandfather appeared. He had already prepared himself mentally and smiled kindly as he bid farewell to the ghost woman. On the other side, Nyat Vin and Ha Chan were locked in a fierce fight. Despite his injuries, Nyat Vin found himself pushed to the edge of the building by Ha Chan. Eventually, Ha Chan raised his hands in surrender and was subdued by Tu An just in time. Fortunately, Nyat Vin hadn't fallen completely, as he desperately clung to the edge of the building. However, after a few moments of struggle, he lost his grip and fell to the ground. At this point, Nyat Vin lost consciousness, and in his delirium, he encountered his father. His father approached him, and unlike before, he spoke gently and warmly to his son. Tears streamed down Nyat Vin's face as he apologized to his father for his past behavior. He regretted how he used to spend all his time drawing and often refused to come down from the car. He felt responsible for the accident that had befallen his grandfather and father back then. His father, however, did not blame him. Instead, he encouraged Nyat Vin to be brave and pursue his dreams, both in art and in life. He emphasized the importance of courage in facing one's dreams and aspirations. Nyat Vin, despite longing for his father to return to life, knew that it was impossible. Nevertheless, his father assured him that as long as Nyat Vin held him in his heart, he would always be there to protect and guide him. To conclude their heartfelt conversation, father and son shared a can of beer. Even though his father was no longer in the physical world, as long as Nyat Vin kept his memory alive, he would remain a comforting presence in his life. With these thoughts, they raised their cans in a toast and took a sip together. Nyat Vin gradually regained his normal state. He started to mumble a few words to Tu An, but then fell back into unconsciousness with no signs of waking up. Although his body remained unresponsive, his soul could travel to many places. He encountered the mysterious man from the beginning of the story, the ancient father and daughter, the fate deity, and the twin siblings. They were all watching over him and offering their blessings. With the encouragement and well wishes of everyone, Nyat Vin finally opened his eyes. His body and soul had merged into one, and he had returned to the world once more. From that moment on, he had taken on another mission, to help the lost souls find their way to the realm of eternal happiness. This is the end of this series. Thank you, everyone, for supporting our team. We appreciate your support very much, and we'll see you in future series. Goodbye and see you again.